online, on the TuneIn app,
and on your smart speaker.
Play Shock Radio.
This is the sound of Salford.
Shock Radio News.
Good evening, you're listening to the Shock News Show with Alfie Mulcahy, Alfie Garner and Ben Cook. Your headlines at just gone 7 o'clock. The father and stepmother of 10-year-old Shara Sarif have been found guilty of murdering her in Surrey last year before fleeing to Pakistan. Police say she endured horrific suffering during her short life. Sarah's mother paid tribute, saying she had beautiful brown eyes and an angelic voice. Dozens of people are being investigated over the post office scandal. Senior Scotland Yard detectives have revealed officers are currently going through at least 1.5 million documents. Sir Keir Starmer has accused the Tories of fear-mongering over inheritance tax for farmers as hundreds of tractors lined Whitehall as part of protests. The Prime Minister insisted the vast majority will be unaffected by the change. Saudi Arabia has been confirmed as the controversial hosts of the 2034 World Cup. The kingdom was the only bidder for the FIFA event. And GCHQ has released its annual Christmas card puzzles, which aim to uncover future code breakers. The spy agency sets 7 brain teasers and hopes 11 to 18-year-olds will work in teams to crack them.
Shock Radio weather.
Staying largely cloudy but dry this evening and overnight. Patchy frost and fog may occur in any clearer spots that do develop. Expect lows of 5 degrees across Manchester tonight. You are listening to the Shock News Show. A very warm welcome to you. We're starting today in Syria, where Syrian rebels have entered Bashar al-Assad's 24-year-long rule, with opposition forces taking the capital and forcing the president to flee earlier this week. The civil war started in 2011, and it started after Assad crushed pro-democracy protests. The fighting killed more than 500,000 people and displaced millions more. Guys, what were your reactions to this early this week when we heard that news?
Yeah, I mean, my reaction was, I was quite shocked. I mean, for the sort of level of, atrocities that we are hearing about now, and, we're seeing come out of Damascus, the prisons, the reports of torture and other horrific things. It's crazy to think for the last largely 50 years, while the Assad family have sort of, gone about their rule of terror over Syria, that we haven't heard more about it. So that's what kind of shocked me about this.
And the initial reaction was met with quite a lot of celebration that this regime had come to an end. But obviously Syria now rests in this position of uncertainty. We don't quite know what shape its government is going to take now, and how the country is going to pull itself through this.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Absolutely. It's all right. Absolutely not. Obviously, I saw the marches that happened in Manchester over the weekend where people were celebrating this new sort of change in Syria, but it has changed into this sort of era where we are getting more to a point of people in Syria worried about the future. Obviously, more and more is coming out. Rebels are starting to go into more centralised Syria to try and start to get to a point of peacemaking, but also to inadvertently celebrate this sort of change in the system over in Syria.
Yeah, and just touching on what you guys have both said, I mean, this sort of takeover now in the hands of the rebels, it has sort of created power vacuums within the country. And there has been warnings by military officials in sort of across Syria that ISIS may rear its ugly head again, and there is deep concerns about that across Syria, as the country does struggle to emerge from sort of this darkness and brutality that we've seen under the Assad regime. There's a lot of different groups that are, sort of vying for a position in this new reality, whatever Syria is going to look like now. And, sort of ISIS picking up momentum and sort of being a key player in that is a big concern.
Well, what we do know is that Israel's new interim prime minister is Mohammed al-Bashir. He was previously the governor of a tiny little pocket of rebel-held territory during the previous rule. Assad has been flown to Moscow, where he's been granted asylum, and it was actually Russia that initially announced that he had stepped down from his position. Since this, Israel has confirmed it carried out attacks on Syria's naval fleet as part of its efforts to neutralise military assets, with more than 350 airstrikes taking place in Syria. Benjamin Netanyahu said it was necessary to prevent an attack on Israel.
We want relations with the new regime in Syria, but if this regime allows Iran to re-establish itself in Syria, or allows the transfer of Iranian weapons or any other weapons to Hezbollah, or attacks us, we will respond forcefully.
Now, across this year, we've seen the situation in the Middle East really step up again. We've had, we haven't had years of peace, but we've had a relatively settled situation over the last decade or so. But within the last year, we've seen it really pick up in that region. How do you guys sort of see it developing going into the new year?
Yeah, well, Israel says it is, focused on sort of destroying Syrian infrastructure. And I think that is because Israel is possibly worried that their military bases are going to fall into the wrong hands, depending on whichever of these groups is to take over Syria now. I think relating to Syria in particular, I mean, only time will tell. I mean, I know a lot of the sort of Syrian people have said that it feels like someone was, almost sitting on their chest. I think I heard quoted from somewhere, and now it's like they can breathe again. So I think now with Syria, it's going to go either one or two ways. I know that the UK Parliament's Keir Starmer has said that he's going to wait and see the rebels' actions to see what his level of involvement is going to be. So I think only time will tell. I think the Middle East is such an unpredictable region in terms of war. I think it has been for a long time. And this definitely does sort of throw the cat amongst the pigeons now.
Yeah, of course. And obviously, Israel is still fighting wars in multiple places across the Middle East, not only Syria now, but also still in Gaza. Lebanon, there is still that ceasefire in place for the next sort of 45 days or so. But what I will suggest is, for these countries, is Israel going to potentially do something to them that would potentially take their powers away from continuing a war against Israel, or will it continue to sort of fester for the countries involved in the wars against Israel to a point where we could see further fighting in the Middle Eastern region?
And this rebel group that's now in charge in Syria is known as HTS, and they're recognised as a terrorist organisation by the UK, the US and the UN. But their leader, Abu Mohammed al-Jilani, has said that people in Syria are exhausted from war and aren't ready for another one. Here's what he had to say.
Their fears are unnecessary, God willing. The country will be rebuilt. The fear was from the presence of the regime. The country is moving towards development and reconstruction. It's going towards stability.
He insists the country will be rebuilt and that the West have nothing to fear from HTS, but we'll just have to see over the coming months. We've got another clip now from Mahmoud Salomon, who was arrested and beaten for protesting in Damascus in 2012.
I remember myself, putting my hand on my head and seeing the blood and realizing that probably these are the last minutes that I'll witness in this world.
And speaking from a UK perspective, we saw lots of politicians earlier this week celebrating this, the end of Assad's leadership. But here's a clip from David Lammy earlier this week. He said it's too early to consider whether or not to change their status.
This flow into Syria could quickly become a flow back out and potentially increase the numbers using dangerous illegal migration routes to continental Europe and the United Kingdom.
So we will just have to see. Is there anything you'd like to add as a sort of last note on this, guys?
Yeah, so David Lammy actually did call Bashir the rat of Damascus. He said that in the Commons. And he also alluded to the fact that the Labour government have been reluctant to, sort of re-engage with Syria as, when Bashir was sort of the ruling power there. A lot of other countries, Middle Eastern countries, especially Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, they all did sort of determine a reasonable relationship with Bashir, despite the the tyranny that he was sort of reigning under, that many would describe it as. And Lamy has said that the rat of Damascus fleeing to Moscow with his tail between his legs, and he's referred to as a criminal and a butcher. So I think that says a little bit as to where the UK stands on the situation.
It does also bring into question, now that this sort of era of previous ruling is over, what will happen to the democracy of Syria? Will it go to a more democratic system? Will it stay in the current state? It's a question that many are asking because they sort of want to see democratization of Syria and other parts of the Middle East. Whether it will happen is still up for question, and a lot of world leaders are looking towards sort of the next sort of 5 years to see whether something of a democracy can come out of the Middle East, and especially in Syria in this modern time.
We will just have to see. Moving on to our next story now, and protests are being held for the fourth week in a row in all 4 capitals of the UK against plans to introduce a 20% inheritance tax on farms with more than 100 million people. Here are some of them voicing their opinions in Cardiff.
Once there's no food on the table, perhaps that's when they might listen to us.
Both my sons are interested in farming. If the inheritance tax stays as they've proposed in the budget, my farm will be decimated.
We've got to the point now where we haven't got nothing else to lose. They've taken everything from us.
This issue has kind of been brought to the fore in the last few weeks by Jeremy Clarkson. He's obviously quite a recent farm owner. He's come to prominence through his Amazon Prime series, and he's kind of led this charge with the farmers. There were protests starting in London 4 weeks ago. They'd put tractors all around Whitehall, brought central London to a standstill because they feel so strongly on this.
Yeah, of course. And as you say, Jeremy Clarkson has become the poster boy of farmers and inheritance tax. It comes after the inheritance tax changes in the budget that Rachel Reeves brought along in October. But it does suggest that if farmers are still sort of fighting this issue, it is a massive issue for a lot of farmers who come from relatively poor backgrounds or don't have a lot of profit to come out of it, because it's taxed based on assets, not profit. So you can have millions of pounds worth of asset in a farm. The farm could not be making that much money. It's whether or not they are looking towards the best ways of taxing farms and agriculture overall.
Yeah, it seems a little disproportionate, doesn't it? And it does seem like sort of, like a lot in sort of when it comes to thresholds that aren't means tested. The people or the farmers in this case on the sort of lower income or lower profit ends are going to be the ones to suffer. I was just reading something quite interesting, and it was set out in the budget by the Labour Party that these taxes on the farms will only affect around 500 estates. But tax experts have now cast doubt over those figures by the Treasury, and they have said that in their estimations, it's more likely 75,000 of individual farm business owners that are likely to be affected over the coming generation. So that is sort of quite interesting. It may, this may affect a lot more people than the government have sort of estimated that it will.
Well, you mentioned the budget there. Here's Keir Starmer. Here's Keir Starmer backing up his budget from earlier this year.
In relation to inheritance tax, as he knows, in a typical family case, the threshold is £3 million, and therefore the vast majority of farmers will be unaffected, despite the fear-mongering of the party opposite.
Well, Tom Bradshaw, the president of the National Farmers Union, he had a meeting with Keir Starmer a few weeks ago, and he says that there's been no government action following that meeting. Here's what he had to say.
Making sure that we don't cut off their supplies and that we keep the public on side is essential to making sure that government have to listen. The sense of anger is one that I have never known. This sense of betrayal that there is at the moment is one which cuts really deep.
And Ed Davey, he's called for the PM to change course and recognise the vital role that the British family farms play. A way this has kind of been framed by some of the newspapers is that it's phrasing farmers as tax cheaters. They see the Labour government's rhetoric is calling farmers treatise on tax, and that lots of people are using farm to justify having vast swathes of land that pass down untaxed.
Well, that's what the BBC also recognised with Jeremy Clarkson. Jeremy Clarkson said a couple of years ago that he did buy his farm in order to avoid some forms of inheritance tax, but then very quickly changed it to be about the farmers. A lot of the farmers aren't buying these mass lands to avoid tax. They're buying the farms to produce meat and other forms of food for shops, because after Brexit, there has been a shortfall of many different types of food in the supermarket because we're not allowed to get them, or it's not easier to get them from mainland Europe, for sure. So we're having to experience that sort of change, but we're also having to see certain people becoming that figureweight of farmers, whereas actually it should be the farmers that we're listening to, not these mass celebrities who really do buy them for those tax benefits.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's definitely always, the best course of action to be actually getting the feelings and the sort of experiences from those on the ground, the actual farmers, not sort of the poster boy, as you said. And just touching on what we're importing, I think, a lot of issues did start coming. I don't think farming in the UK, unless it's at a huge level, is profitable. I think farms have been dwindling for years and years, and I think a lot of that does come from a lot of import from abroad. And, we're not sort of growing our own in the way that we used to be. And, sort of speaking towards what Labour are, sort of alluding to, as in a lot of farmers being tax dodgers, I think that, like anything, like any tax dodgers in areas apart from farming, a lot of that happens at the top end. These poorer farmers who are not in great profit won't be benefiting from any type of loopholes. For instance, there has been a loophole used by the super rich to avoid tractor tax. And most family farms won't be able to benefit from this, but it has been used by sort of those farms on the higher ends of the profit margins. And to avoid being hit with the levy, what's been happening is many family farms will be passed down and gifted to other family members. However, there's a clause in it that means that if a farmer passes down their estate but still benefits from by either living on the farm property or using it for any means to support their lifestyle, they will be heavily taxed on that. And that's probably just not a risk that, farmers struggling to get by are gonna put themselves on the line for. So yeah, I think it's just all relative to the sort of higher and lower ends of the farming industry.
So something else that the National Union of Farmers has sort of highlighted is that whilst the government has chosen to defend their position, the NFU have pointed out that they've used several different figures throughout, coming from different sources, and that the government's story, as it were, isn't quite as coherent as they'd like it to be, in order for them to agree more with this rise. Moving on now. Today is our last shock news show of the year. So I thought it would be a good thing to do to ask both of you what your biggest news event of the year has been. I'm going to start with you, Alfie.
For me, it was the election that we had earlier this year here in the UK. Obviously, there was the US one, but for the UK, it was vital. A lot of people saw the Tories after 14 years as damaging to the UK and wanted that change. It's now, we've seen 6 months of Labour is delivering that change. I was in one of the Ribble Valley constituency helping Sky News report on their election night, and the atmosphere there was so weird because it wasn't describable as Labour was going to win this. It was more describable of no one knows what's going to happen. Labour did win that constituency. David Evans, who was the former Deputy Speaker, did lose his seat that night, but there was that energy of no one knows what's happening next. And I think that's, for a lot of the constituencies, it was that era because you couldn't tell whether the Conservative candidate was going to keep their seat, whether they were going to lose, whether they were going to lose to the Lib Dems, whether Reform were going to have a big share of the vote, as he ended up doing on the night. So it kind of led to a point where everyone kind of knew the result going in, that Labour were going to win. No one knew the actual result of Reform picking up massive seats, Conservatives not collapsing entirely, but dwindling a lot in a lot of these polls and a lot of these seats across the UK.
Yeah, and I'll let you go, Ben.
No, Alfie, you go ahead.
I was just going to say that reform had a lot of traction going through that campaign, and a lot of people thought that would dwindle after the election. But they've still had a steady stream of monetary support, but also media attention as well, carrying them through. And I think on election day, lots of people underestimated the impact they might have into the future. Maybe think about 2029. I feel like they've really shaken up our political makeup, and looking ahead to 2029, I think it's looking more uncertain than ever, really.
Yeah, and I do think as Alfie said, this Alfie next to me, he said that sort of we all knew that there was going to be a Labour landslide, and it almost had sort of, when the polls were coming in, it had a Tony Blair like sort of landslide to it. But the events that have, followed have not been the case. I mean, Keir Starmer's popularity absolutely plummeted, whereas Tony Blair, when he got into power, there was sort of this resurgence, and there was, New Labour and a sort of freshness and excitement. Things for Keir Starmer only seem to have gone down in terms of popularity. So that's what shocked me this year, considering that we were coming. It's not like it was, what we've seen in the US between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, where it was literally neck and neck. That weren't the case for us here. But I'd say we've had a year of two massive elections as well in 2024. So I think they do have to dominate, some of the biggest news moments. I would say that mine was the US election. I did not personally see Donald Trump winning. I mean, Kamala Harris, albeit by a tiny margin, was leading the whole way through. There seemed to be a lot of people, the media was very vocal about how problematic another Trump term could be. It's something that I just didn't see happening. And also the fact that, in the run-up to the election, we've seen Donald Trump, we've seen an assassination attempt of Donald Trump, not once, but twice. And that is kind of, that was scary to me. I thought, are we really sort of living in a climate where that is still a possibility? I mean, we look at what happened to JFK, and it's a huge landmark moment in history, and we think that we're so far removed from that, and a sort of thing like that wouldn't happen again. Whatever you think of Donald Trump, I don't think an assassination attempt, it's out of the question. It's just absolutely ludicrous. Like what's happened with Syria as well, I didn't think that we would see, the overturn of a 50-year regime. There's just been so much in 2024 that I think has been wild on the political spectrum, and we've seen big, huge changes and things that have happened in the past that, we wouldn't have really seen sort of happening again. Quite dramatic events.
And since that US election, what we've seen is Donald Trump has selected his cabinet, his closest advisors. And we've seen Elon Musk and several other big figures that have been traditionally been associated with the media rather than politics coming into President Trump's close circle. So I think this next term we'll really see a shift in where power lies in America. We are less likely to see it being dominated by diplomats and potentially people who've been in politics for decades, and instead see kind of the people associated with the media take charge in America.
Yeah, I think you've really hit the nail on the head with that one, Alfie, and I think that is another huge change we've seen within the political sphere this year. I mean, even, on the other side of the coin in the American election, we had Kamala Harris, and, the amount that she sort of paid in celebrity endorsements. We had her election trail dubbed as the Brat Summer, which is insane when you think of, the historic conventions of Westminster that we see here in the UK. So, yeah, that is a real change in the political, the sort of celebrity endorsement and involvement within the political sphere is something that is very modern. It's, it's sort of, we're living in that world, but politics is always sort of behind, although maybe it shouldn't be. And I'm more not talking to the policies, but the structures, and to see them really get in line with that is quite something. But it's just getting to a point now where, is having, sort of celebrity, big media personalities making key vital decisions on policy. Are they qualified to do that? That is what, the consequences are yet to be seen, aren't they, of this?
Yeah, and obviously, absolutely. It's the same here as well, because during the election, we obviously had a lot of big names endorsing certain candidates, but also now in government, Keir Starmer has appointed a lot of people who haven't previously touched politics. So for the Minister of Prisons, he appointed Sir James Timpson to sort of manage that from the Lords, like Rishi Sunak did from the last term with David Cameron, who was previously in politics but spent at least 7 years outside of it. So we're sort of seeing that shift in power to be more from people who are a generalist and cover a wide spectrum, maybe specialise in certain bits, to a specialist who can go into the Lords and use that experience that they have to influence a government's decisions for a certain sort of aspect of industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something we can keep an eye on going into the next year on the Shock News Show. Now, we are almost at Christmas and we're almost at the end of our time today. I thought it'd be nice to end with a nice uplifting message. So a couple of weeks back, I went and spoke to the Eccles Borough Band at Eccles Town Hall about performing at Christmas. Few things are as Christmassy as the sound of a brass band filling the air on a cold Sunday afternoon, just a few weeks before Christmas. And the Eccles Borough Band is no different. I joined them for their annual Christmas concert in the ballroom at Eccles Town Hall, where I spoke to musical director Marika Gray.
It's not like orchestral concerts where everything's quite static, but when you have an audience like this who've been very, very loyal to us, I think it's like when you're in a room with family, because you need to get them involved. Otherwise, you create this us and them feeling, and I think that's why they like it so much. Is because I talk to them like a friend rather than talking down to them or trying to educate them or anything like that. I think the atmosphere in the hall is electric. They want people come here knowing they're going to have a good time, so we can't lose. They're enjoying themselves from the moment they see us standing outside, with our sandwiches before we start. I try and provide music that the people like. It's a lot of fun. People look forward to it, these concerts. So we're at the point of turning people away tonight. It was that full. We need a bigger hall.
But whilst tonight has been a success for the band, it's been a tough few years.
6 of us, including myself, have had cancer over the last 15, 16 months. I outdid myself by slipping over in the shower and breaking my shoulder, so I've only been back to conducting for about a month and a half. So it's just been one of those years. But, and also too, the band's had different conductors while I've been away and not being able to conduct. So I think next year is looking promising.
Dan Ashton plays bass trombone in the band, and I spoke to him just after the performance.
The days of static brass band concerts should be gone. The interaction makes people want to see movement, they want to do stuff and be involved. I think we're quite fortunate and unfortunate in a way. We've got a lot of people who travel for work, a lot of people who are away for long periods of time, so just by virtue of trying to get everybody in the same room for a period of time is a challenge.
I really enjoyed the final piece, Shine is the Light. It's a brilliant piece of music, but as cheesy as it is, I actually get a bit emotional at the start when everyone walks onto Jingle Bells. It's just one of those things, it's the audience has been sitting there for half an hour. The hall was full for half an hour. They come out and there's this little gasp from the audience, and that gets me every time.
Getting everybody involved and making them feel part of the performance as well makes people come back, and like you said, they know they're going to have a good time.
The band are hoping to go from strength to strength in the new year and are looking forward to their next concert in the spring. It was brilliant going to talk to the Eccles Borough Band just a few weeks ago. Nice Christmassy end to our year on Shock News. We'll end with your headlines at just gone 7:30. The father and stepmother of 10-year-old Sarah Sharif have been found guilty of murdering her in Surrey last year before fleeing to Pakistan. Police say she endured horrific suffering during her short life. Sarah's mother paid tribute, saying she had beautiful brown eyes and an angelic voice. We're being warned that prisons in England and Wales could still run out of space despite new measures being implemented. 4 new ones are being built in the next 7 years. Dozens of people are being investigated over the post office scandal, with senior Scotland Yard detectives revealing officers are currently going through at least 1.5 million documents. Sir Keir Starmer has accused the Tories of fear-mongering over inheritance tax for farmers as hundreds of tractors lined Whitehall as part of protests. The Prime Minister insists the vast majority will be unaffected by the change. In sport, and Saudi Arabia has been confirmed as the controversial hosts of the 2034 World Cup. The kingdom was the only bidder for the FIFA event. And GCHQ has released its annual Christmas card puzzle, which aims to uncover future codebreakers. The spy agency's set 7 brain teasers and hopes 11 to 18-year-olds will work in teams to crack them. That has been your Shock News Show for today. I've been Alfie Mulcahy, joined by Alfie Garner and Ben Cook. The Shock News Show was produced by Luke Jones, and I'd like to say a special thank you to Aaron Walkden for directing and editing lots of this series. We'll see you next year.